I'm John Stokes. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Biochemistry and Biomedical Sciences at McMaster University, and I'm a research affiliate at the MIT Jameel Clinic. And my research laboratory develops and deploys artificial intelligence algorithms to help us discover new antibiotics. Antibiotic resistance is it's a big problem that is under discussed, I'll say, in most public circles. So we've had antibiotics for the better part of 100 years. Our first, what I'll call modern antibiotic, was discovered entirely by accident by Alexander Fleming in 1928. And since the discovery of penicillin, we've discovered probably 20 or so different antibiotic classes and currently have, I would guess, around 100 different antibiotics that fall into those 20 classes that are deployed in the clinic to treat, different types of infections. What's, problematic about antibiotics, and it's just an inherent feature of how these molecules work, is as soon as we discover a new antibiotic and start using it in the real world, either in clinical settings, which is how we most often think about antibiotics, but also in agricultural settings, right, to prevent disease and promote growth of livestock, is the bacteria that these antibiotics kill. Those bacteria evolve mechanisms to resist being killed by those antibiotics. So over, decades of clinical and agricultural use of these antibacterial drugs, the bacteria that these drugs were once effective against will evolve resistance mechanisms to evade the action of those antibiotics and continue to grow in their presence. That poses a serious clinical problem because if you have a patient who has a bacterial infection and you give them an antibiotic to which that infection is resistant, that patient will get sicker and sicker and sicker. And this problem has become very severe in recent decades. So this year, roughly, 1.3 to 1.5, somewhere in there, million people are going to die from a drug-resistant infection that we used to be able to treat a couple decades ago. And without immediate productivity in discovering fundamentally novel antibacterial molecules, that number is projected to grow to roughly 10 million people dying per year due to drug-resistant infections by 2050. The other thing that antibiotics enable us to do is quite literally all of modern medicine. So, saving lives of people who have bacterial infections is one of their jobs. But the other thing that antibiotics allow us to do are medical procedures such as joint replacements or organ transplants or immunosuppressive cancer chemotherapy or, enabling preterm births. So all of these modern, sophisticated medical procedures that we currently, I would say, take for granted are only able to be routinely practiced because we can control infections that are inevitably going to happen. So when we run out of, clinically robust antibiotics with which to treat infection, all of these modern medical procedures that extend life and increase quality of life have to stop as well. I don't consider antibiotics as molecules that just treat bacterial infection. I treat them as the foundation of modern medicine, like they're quality of life drugs at the end of the day. So what we need to consider are sort of two ideas. One, every antibiotic that we ever discover will succumb to resistance because bacteria are really, really tricky and they divide really fast and they figure out ways to avoid being killed by these molecules that are designed to kill them. That's one. The other thing we have to think about is that we haven't discovered and deployed a fundamentally novel antibiotic into the clinic really since 1987, right? So we're going on 40 years now without putting any novel antibiotics into clinical use, really. So with those two ideas, right, we're faced with this reality where we need to develop novel methods that are really, really efficient to discover clinically viable antibiotic candidates to treat drug-resistant bacterial infections. That's the world that we live in right now. So the question becomes, what is the set of possible technologies that we can develop new antibiotics with really, really quickly and ideally quite inexpensively? Because there are very few, if any, economic incentives to invent new antibiotics. And it's my opinion, right? And it's just my opinion that, artificial intelligence approaches appear to be one, really promising set of tools that will enable us to discover fundamentally novel antibiotics way faster and way cheaper than we historically have before. Because the perfect world that we're ultimately kind of chasing, at least I think, is a world in which we can invent, optimize, and then deploy antibacterial medicines faster than resistance can evolve against them in the clinic. Because in that world, if we have novel antibiotic A that we've deployed in the clinic and we see widespread resistance to A, well, it doesn't matter because we have molecule like B, C, and D already sitting on a shelf ready to go because we planned ahead and we knew resistance to A was coming. Here's something that I've been playing with and thinking about quite a lot recently, right? So let's say, just for argument's sake, let's use round numbers here. It currently takes, about $1 billion to go from idea to, antibiotic that could be deployed in the clinic. If we work backwards, we can say, okay, for the last 100 years, we've had, let's call it 20 antibiotic classes that have got us, through the past 100 years, right? And fundamentally transformed healthcare. So if we can say, well, what if the next 100 years, we need another 20 antibiotic classes? Well, that's $20 billion, right? $20 billion sounds like a lot, but if we look at $20 billion in the context of like GDP, right? It's nothing. I think the GDP of the G7 nations is something like 50 trillion. So 20 billion of $50 trillion is like a rounding error. For $20 billion, we can solve like a grand challenge, like in a pressing global health issue. If, the most wealthy nations on our planet come together and pool just a little bit of their money. In my opinion, the antibiotic resistance crisis can be solved quite efficiently if, governments decide that they want to make this problem go away. I feel like it's kind of a no-brainer, right? We just need people in positions of power to decide that this problem needs to go away, and it'll go away. Like, it's cheap. Like, I don't know. Like, dude, you can go right now and look on, like, what is it, the Forbes list of billionaires or something. I bet you, let's do this. Actually, let's look. I'm going to guess that there's about 100 people living right now that are individually worth more than $20 billion. Hang on, let me look this up. There are exactly 120 people or families who are individually worth more than $20 billion this minute. So like, this is a non-problem, right? If we really wanted to make this problem go away, from a financial perspective, like from an economic perspective, we can make this problem go away. It bugs me a little bit, right? The fact that we can make this problem go away, but it also makes me feel good, right? Because we know how to fix this problem. We had this problem fixed already. So we know that it's a solvable problem, because there's a world, and it's not that far away, right? Where I have to go in to get a hip replaced because I have arthritis, and the surgeon won't do the surgery because it's too risky from an infection perspective, right? Sure, we can give you the new hip, but you might get an infection that we can't treat. So here's a wheelchair. And so it's like those little quality of life things that often get overlooked that are enabled by antibiotics. Like, I don't know, they're just like super important. So in a laboratory, if we can run 1 million experiments, let's say, testing 1 million different molecules to see which ones are antibacterial or not. And antibiotic discovery, just like all of drug discovery, is a process built on failure. You like fail, something kind of works. You take that success and then fail a whole bunch more. So you fail your way to an antibiotic. But, the application of ML or AI, when it's applied appropriately, trained on relevant data, et cetera, it enables us just to look at like orders of magnitude more possible chemicals that could be antibacterial than we ever could in a laboratory. And by being able to look at way more molecules than we ever could in a laboratory, it just increases our probability of success, right? Of finding new antibiotics faster and cheaper. I like to think of these machine learning algorithms as tools to help us make better experimental decisions at each key decision-making step along the development pipeline of an antibiotic. We don't have to fly quite as blind. We can use these models to help us guide what decisions we're going to make, like with the goal of making a little bit of a better decision at each key step. That's how we use them. That's how I think we should be using them, at least to solve this antibiotic resistance problem.